Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage President of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Julia Stash.
Well, good morning, and all I can say is a sigh of relief at last. But on behalf of the MacArthur Foundation, welcome to 100&Change, the Finalists Live. Thank you for being here. I want to say it again, thank you. So first of all, make no little plans. They have no magic. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work. You might recognize those words as belonging to the famed architect and Chicago's own Daniel Burnham. His quote is now a credo of sorts, not only for urban planning, but for Chicago itself. Now, encouraged by our board at MacArthur, we tried something new. We asked ourselves, we asked our grantees, we asked our partners, and we asked many of you in the room and many more that we regularly engage with. Why not apply those words and that spirit to our work? Make big plans, aim high in hope and work. What impact could we have when we make a big bet on a critical challenge? What kind of change can we make? What kind of progress, measurable progress, will we see? We're applying this approach to several challenges like climate change and justice reform. Now, of course, we don't know everything, so we asked what else is possible with significant funding, with $100 million. Who else has ambitions that we should support? We said any issue, anywhere, but the important thing is to think big. Tell us about a truly profound problem of our time. Tell us how you can solve it or how you can make really significant progress. Now, these questions were not merely an intellectual exercise because today you will hear from 4 amazing finalists, one of which will receive our $100 million grant, which we will announce on December 20th. $100 million to make their solution a reality, to bring its benefits to a truly significant number of people, to make the world a better place. Now, I am particularly proud that each of the finalists has carefully considered issues of inclusion and equity, including specifically persons with disabilities. Still, much work remains for them and for MacArthur on this just imperative. Now, I want to get right to the finalists' presentations, but before we do, I want to share with you 3 quick lessons. Lessons are important because this is new for us. It's a real departure from what we've done in the past. The first lesson, be optimistic. Now, it is so easy to become cynical when all you hear about is how things are not working, when all you see is political fighting and policy gridlock. 100&Change provides exactly the opposite. These are feasible proposals with the potential for impact at real scale, seemingly intractable problems with solutions in sight. Ambitious, audacious, aspirational. We saw it all. In fact, we received almost 2,000 proposals. Hopeful, creative, thoughtful, insightful proposals. They were bold solutions to critical challenges affecting people across the country, but around the world, hundreds of them ready to go. All they needed was a partner to help get it across the line. So they were inspiring then, and they are even more inspiring today. So be optimistic because solutions are possible. Now, the second lesson was be involved. There are so many opportunities to support important work. 100&Change should not be the only resource. It isn't, and it can't be. Now, courageous early funders helped bring these finalists to where they are today. Our thanks to them. But going forward, it is absolutely thrilling to see new relationships form. Judges and advisors helping applicants sharpen their proposals and improve their focus. Funders introduced to new projects, not just the finalists, but everywhere, all up and down the list. Foundations sharing strategies and approaches. What we have now is a network, an engaged, real community connected by common values and the shared belief that we can do some good. So let's nurture that. This work should not end with one grant and a single winner. There are hundreds of projects ready to be supported, ready to begin to amplify their impact. Today is the beginning of that process, not the end. So be involved. Finally, the third lesson, be bold. That's where I started. Even for an organization like ours that's focused on a small number of big bets, a single $100 million grant is a risky proposition. It's actually more than risky, it is scary. But those of us with resources, those of us who can take risks, those of us, like everybody in this room, who cares about the planet and its people, we need to act because philanthropy is best positioned to provide society's risk capital. Of course, we'll be diligent. We balance risk with empirical evidence. We'll keep you all engaged, we'll keep you informed, but we will welcome and involve others. But we will be laser focused on impact, on results. But just as we asked our applicants to think big, just as Daniel Burnham said later in his famous quote, do things that will stagger us. We will be bold, but we hope that you will be too. So there's three lessons. Be optimistic, be involved, and be bold, because solutions are possible. People with passion, like those that you will hear from today, will make it happen. We can help, but all of us together can help. Now to introduce the 4 100&Change finalists from the PBS NewsHour and our MC for the morning and one of my favorite people on TV, Hari Srinivasan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. So as a journalist, I've covered a lot of stories. I've had the opportunity to tell a lot of tales from places all over the world, from here in the Midwest to places like my birthplace in Mumbai. Now, some of my favorites, the ones that really stick with me, the ones that are hard or impossible to forget, have a common thread. They feature an individual or a community facing long odds, but willing to take a risk. They're about someone or someplace breaking through barriers of cynicism, of doubt, of neglect, and fear. And they end with something remarkable, a newfound hope, a renewed will, literally a new future. That's what the MacArthur Foundation is doing today with 100&Change, and that's why I'm happy to be here to help them with this. So first, I want to thank you all, not just for being here today, but for what being here says about you and the world that we share. It says that you recognize that the nation and the world face some critical challenges, that solutions are possible, and that you want to be part of those solutions. Your involvement says that with imagination, with insight, with purpose, and yes, with some funding, there are problems of our time that are within our collective ability to solve. That's not just admirable, it's actually inspiring. And today, we near the end of the 100&Change process and the competition, but let's remember the journey didn't start this morning. A year and a half ago, the MacArthur Foundation asked organizations to identify and offer a solution for any critical problem affecting people, places, or our planet. Be careful what you ask for. They got 7,000 registrants who submitted nearly 2,000 diverse proposals. 800 eventually became 8, and today there are 4. So in a moment, we're going to hear directly from the people leading these world-changing projects, but I'd like to reiterate something that Julia just mentioned. This is a unique opportunity, but it requires action, and success depends on it. It actually depends on you, the people in this room. The world is waiting, and solutions are possible.
Everything changes. Yet problems we have faced for generations still lie before us. Working together in common cause, we can create lasting solutions to eradicate hunger, to heal the scars of war, to nurture the vulnerable, and to save lives. Solutions are possible. and we can change the world.
So the 4 finalists are working on truly critical challenges of our time: educating children displaced by war and hatred, cultivating more nutritious and sustainable staple crops to solve hidden hunger in Africa, developing and sharing technology to save the lives of newborns, and supporting families so they can stay together instead of depending on orphanages. The statistics around all of these issues can be staggering. The stories heart-wrenching. But today, you'll also hear about something different. Not only the scope of the problem, but also the solutions at scale. Help keep the conversation going online. This is a place where you don't have to turn your phones off. You can actually use the hashtag 100&Change. You can ask questions about the presentations. The teams will answer them online as well. And this afternoon, you'll have an opportunity for an up-close experiential look at each project in more intimate breakout sessions. So let's start. What do you get when you take an institution with almost 50 years of experience in early childhood development, one that reaches 183 million children around the world, and match it with one of the most well-known and most successful humanitarian service organizations? Of course, I'm referring to Sesame, the world's most recognized street, and the International Rescue Committee. What you get is the ability to deliver educational content directly to children and families in areas of conflict and crisis, specifically to the millions of children and families in the Syrian response region. Ladies and gentlemen, our first finalist, please welcome from the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband, and from Sesame Workshop, Sherry Weston.
فلينا اللغة اللي قبلنا صار فيها حرب وشيء، واحنا فلينا اجينا لهون.
العالم كيف بتموت قدامي.
Can you tell me how to get to the sun?
لأن البلد هلا تدمرت، ما ظل لنا شيء. نخاف من عتمة الليل.
On my way to where the air is sweet.
يعني بس أكبر كل بعرف أقرأ وأكتب هذا الشيء اللي بتمنى.
How to get to Sesame Street.
Sesame Street. It makes us all think of joy, laughter, learning, as the song says, sunny days. Today, we want to persuade you to bring laughter and learning to the most vulnerable children in the world. Refugee children who have known bombing, not schools. Soldiers, not teachers. Treacherous journeys, not secure foundations. Around the world, 65 million people have been displaced from their homes by war and persecution, more than at any time since World War II. Half of those people are children. That means that last year, every 6 seconds, another child was forced to flee from war. Honestly, talk about big global problem. Now, we know that the average refugee family are displaced from their homes for 10 years. Yet the learning and development of young children under the age of 8, it's bottom of the pile when it comes to the operation of the aid system. Aid is good at keeping people alive. It helps them thrive. It helps them survive. But it doesn't give them the tools to thrive. And that is what we are absolutely determined to deliver. At the moment, it's incredible, really. 2% of the global aid budget goes on education. And a sliver of that 2% goes to the children under the age of 8 who we are targeting. That's not just a big global problem. It's a disgrace. And our message today to all of you is simple. It's in our hands, it's in our power to turn it around. I've just been to Jordan. I met two brothers, Arif and Ghazi. Arif, 15, Ghazi, 2 years old. Their parents perished during the war in Syria. So they're being raised by their uncle in Jordan, in the Azraq refugee camp. Now, 15-year-old Arif, he's got resources to draw on. He went to primary school in Syria before the war began. And he talked to me about his pride and joy, this artwork that he puts his heart and soul into. The pictures of soldiers, of children with tears, are absolutely heartrending. But he was confident and articulate. However, 2-year-old Ghazi was striking for a different reason. Not because he came forward, but because of the way he held back. Remember, he's only known war and displacement. I sat in the tent that is their home with the kids from both families, Arif and Ghazi's family and the uncle's family. We sat on the floor, but Ghazi, the 2-year-old, he sat outside the main circle with his back against the wall of the tent. He was silent, still, sort of withdrawn. He wasn't really like any 2-year-old I've ever known. And when I spoke to the uncle, he was amazing, really. I mean, the courage and the fortitude. He didn't complain about anything in Azraq camp except one thing. There was one thing he asked for. He said he gets no support in bringing up 2-year-old Ghazi. There is no preschool. And the school that is there for the 6- and 7-year-olds, he just shook his head and he said it's not good enough. He was truly frightened about the future for that generation of children. And I could see this man was doing everything he could. But I knew in my heart he was right to worry. The greatest danger for children like Ghazi and millions of young children like him is something called toxic stress. Stress so prolonged and extreme that it triggers a flood of hormones that impair the way the brain develops. But here's the thing about the latest brain science. It shows us the danger of toxic stress. It also shows the solution. Intervene early when the children are young. That's when their brains are developing at an absolutely extraordinary rate. Any of you with children or grandchildren will have seen it yourselves. Influence the development at a young age, and you set them on a positive path for life. Delay, and the costs are huge for them and for their society. We've designed a program for the Middle East because it is the epicenter of the global refugee crisis. In Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and inside Syria, there are 1,000 IRC staff working there today. Inside Syria as well, we can reach literally millions of children. What's more, we're absolutely clear about the imperative of creating a model of early intervention that can be used for refugee children all around the world, so that high-quality investment in early childhood development becomes the norm in humanitarian emergencies, not the exception. Now, it's possible to conceive such a plan and be sure that we can deliver it because two extraordinary organizations have come together: the International Rescue Committee and Sesame Workshop.
I'm sure most of you here know Sesame Street, but you may not be aware of the depth and breadth of our work. Today, we reach children in 160 countries, making us one of the largest educators in the world. And we have a long history of addressing some of the most challenging issues facing children, whether that's HIV and AIDS in South Africa, or lack of opportunities for girls in places like Afghanistan, or the growing number of children diagnosed with autism right here at home. We create relevant content, stories, characters, all designed to meet the unique needs of children. So it's not surprising, given the staggering number of children today who've been forced to flee their homes, leaving behind their schools, everything they've known, that we felt we had a responsibility to help. But we also knew we couldn't do it alone. We needed an organization that understood the plight of refugees as well as we understand the needs of young children. And that's what led us to our partnership with the IRC, the organization that has done more to help refugees than just about any other. The IRC is providing life-changing services to over 26 million people in 40 countries. And they share our commitment to evidence-based education and rigorous research. So, by combining the IRC's roots in refugee communities with Sesame's proven educational content, together we will create the largest early childhood intervention in the history of humanitarian response. We call it Sesame Seeds. So, through the power of media, Sesame Seeds will reach 9.4 million children and millions of caregivers in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. We'll create an all-new Sesame Street in Arabic and Iraqi Kurdish, teaching the academic basics, literacy, numeracy, but also the social emotional skills that children need to thrive. Also, by working with 12,000 home visitors, 6,000 facilitators, we'll reach 1.5 million of the most vulnerable children through home visits, learning centers, community programs, all designed to help caregivers restore nurturing relationships and give children the tools they need to overcome the trauma of war. So we'd like to take you to Lebanon to give you a glimpse of this work on the ground.
صباح الخير. كيفك؟ Our early childhood program begins in the home, whether it's a shelter, a tent, a crowded apartment, it doesn't matter. كيفك يا أمين؟ The most important thing is that the children need to be with their parents, the first caregivers with whom they will build trusting relationships and learn new things in order for them to be able to build knowledge on the long run. Okay. We give them activities to promote reading, learning the alphabet, counting, a lot of language skills.
تبعت الغسيل شو اسمه؟
كمان الغسيل.
Cells.
We empower the parents with skills to support their child's development. They can play with them using objects that they can find in their homes.
4 5 6 7 8.
We show them how to communicate with their children frequently in a way that promotes praise.
Bravo!
Most of the parents that I work with, when we first meet, they describe their role as shelter provider, food provider, as the one who's making sure that their children survive. Yet with time, they start engaging with their children and they would say, I used to do this in Syria, but I was not able to do it anymore with my kids. Thank you for helping me.
أصابتني عقدة نفسية حتى حنان لهلا تحسيه على طول روح أيضا المدارس هناك ما عاد نبعتهم على المدرسة ولهلا بس بشوف ويسمع بحس ضرب أو ألعاب نارية غزايف يعني هون ما في شيء ماما هون عادي طبيعي ما عنا مو مثل بسوريا.
اليوم موعد حفلة عيد ميلادي طن
نحن بنعرف إن الأطفال إجوا من بيئة مختلفة، بيئة فيها حرب، شافوا أشياء ممكن إنه خوفتهم، يعني في عندهم حالة إنه غير الأطفال العاديين اللي هن رايحين على المدرسة، فنحن لحتى نرجع لهم ثقتهم بنفسهم بدنا نحاول نحن نعمل لهم هيك كلهم، نأمن لهم المكان الآمن، نأمن لهم البيئة الآمنة لحتى هن بيشعروا بالثقة. والمدرسة مأمنت له هالشيء، فهن أكيد رح تأثر بالمستقبل، رح يبنوا مجتمع، أكيد رح يكون المجتمع منيح، مجتمع فعال أكيد.
بسام عبط تنتن اترك ايدها عبط تنتن
That kid saying, wow, it always makes me smile however many times I see that video. The key to measurable impact is to reach children wherever they are, and I mean measurable impact on literacy, numeracy, social and emotional learning. We're going to reach them in their homes and in their communities, in health centers and preschools, on their mobile phones and through television. And we've gained commitments from all the other major NGOs in the region and government agencies across the region, including ministries in Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, to help deliver and implement the plan at high quality. As you saw in the video, there are 3 elements to the plan. First, Sesame Seeds Home is going to train and deploy 12,000 home visitors in the kind of places that I just visited in Jordan. This is the front line in the battle against toxic stress. These home visitors are going to demonstrate to parents games and activities that help strengthen the working memory of the kids, help improve their social and emotional skills, their ability to express themselves, help nurture them through the trauma that they've been through. And then, to reinforce what's done face-to-face, we're able to send videos and reminders to the parents or the caregivers' mobile phones to reinforce what's learned face-to-face. Second, Sesame Seeds Center is going to transform health clinics, child protection offices, community centers, preschools into genuine and inspiring centers of learning. The missing element in all those places at the moment is lack of educational content of high quality and lack of trained staff. Sesame Seeds is going to tackle both of those 2 problems. Childcare centers will become engaging and interactive places of learning, toys, games, lesson plans, a multimedia library. Instead of being the exception, we're going to make them the norm. Here is the vision for Sesame Seeds Center. 3 hours a day of focused instruction delivered by 6,000 trained facilitators, meeting the early childhood needs of the most vulnerable children in the region. Finally, Sesame Seeds mass media. It's going to use the power of television and digital technology to change lives. I was surprised about this. Over 90% of the households in the Middle East have got access to a TV. That includes the refugee families. The family I visited in Jordan, they had a TV in their tent. Nearly 80% of the families in the Middle East have got a mobile phone. Over the course of 5 years, we're committed to producing more than 200 new episodes of local Sesame Street. In the process, we're going to be able to give 9 million children a friend on Sesame Street. So the plan has got breadth through the TV and the digital technology, but it's also got depth through the in-person services. Because of that, we can break out of the traditional barriers that have prevented humanitarian programs ever going to scale. Think about this. The top 45 early childhood development experts in the world published an analysis in The Lancet showing that early childhood programs deliver a return of $17 for every dollar that you invest. That turns $100 million into nearly $2 billion. We wanted to check those statistics for our program. So we commissioned an independent cost-benefit analysis from the leading center of cost-benefit analysis in education at Columbia University to assess the return on Sesame Seeds. They confirmed that even with the most conservative estimates, we can expect a return better than the 17-to-1 ratio in the Lancet analysis. One reason we can do that is that we've kept our costs right down. For the 5 years of intensive support through the home visitors and the Sesame Seed centers, the cost per child is only $32 across the lifetime of the program. The mass media work is $5 per child across the 5 years of the program. Now, here's the point that I want to get across to you as well. Our program isn't only costed, it's tested. It's tested against the most rigorous research, the most rigorous impact evaluations, and the latest brain science. You may guess that I'm not a brain scientist. That is true. So don't take my word for it about the research or the science. Listen to Dr. Hiro Yoshikawa, a leading expert in early childhood development, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the science and the evidence behind our program.
Children living in conflict and displacement of the type we're talking about suffer what we call toxic stress, which is cumulative, chronic adversity that has lifelong consequences. Toxic stress affects the body's fight or flight mechanisms. When those are activated essentially constantly, it actually overactivates the body's defense systems, and that results in damage to biological systems and the capacity to learn and absorb learning and enrichment from the environment. Toxic stress actually damages the brain's ability to make those millions of neuronal connections. What all children need in these early years is nurturing care, a comforting routine, and the opportunities to learn through play. Nurturing care is the responsive interactions that caregivers, teachers, parents can provide so that children are nurtured in all the parts of their day and throughout the first few years of life. Serve and return interactions are the moment-to-moment responses to an infant's communications and cues. Brain architecture is built through those serve and return interactions. All children also need a comforting routine, so we can think of being tucked in every night, of a teacher knowing your name every day in preschool. Children need the opportunity to learn through play, the opportunities for playful interaction from others and from programs is something these children have been missing. If you miss early childhood, you've really missed the prime opportunity to set a child on the right trajectory.
As you heard from Dr. Yoshikawa, the early years in life offer a unique window, a moment in time when we can help these children, a moment we will not be able to recapture. So for almost 50 years, Sesame Street has been reaching children during those critical early years because we know that's when we can have the greatest impact and the greatest return on investment. And the evidence to support this spans decades and multiple countries. There have been over 1,000 studies on the impact of Sesame Street, but perhaps most relevant is a 15-country meta-analysis that studied our international work from Bangladesh to South Africa and showed that watching these local versions of Sesame Street consistently produced higher outcomes, cognitive and social learning, that were comparable to that of a traditional preschool, only at cost and only at scale, that's really important, and a fraction of the cost. And those results are even greater for the most disadvantaged children. So today, I want to highlight 3 areas that will lead to impact with Sesame Seeds. First, it's creating content in local countries. Second, engaging adults as well as children. And third, of course, the power of our Muppets. So first, by working with local educators, ministries of education, artists, writers, researchers, we create local versions of Sesame Street that are tailored to meet the unique needs of children in country, their language, their culture. And these productions, they reflect children's own realities with local characters they can identify with. So I'll give you an example. In Afghanistan, a country where only a third of girls are in school, we created Bache Simpson, which means Sesame Garden in Dari and Pashto. We created the first local Afghan Muppet, a little girl named Zari. And it's important to know that one of our key curricular goals is gender equity. So Zari, as you can see, she proudly wears her school uniform. She loves to go to school. And she is modeling for girls and boys the importance of going to school. And the research shows that little Afghan boys who watch test 30% higher on attitudes of gender equity. And it gets even better. We've also heard time and again from fathers who cite Bache Simpson as the reason they've changed their minds about permitting their daughters to go to school. That's the power of media and Muppets, to not only reach children, many of whom have no other access to quality early education, but also to change attitudes and behaviors in a non-threatening way, planting the seeds for societal change. Second was Sesame's appeal to adults. It's worth noting that in Afghanistan, we're reaching close to 4 million children, and 70% of those children watch with a parent or caregiver. And that's by design. You know, since Sesame Street's inception, our founders and creators set out to engage adults as well as children. That's why they included celebrities and musicians and parodies and humor, because they believed that the learning would be deeper if an adult was watching with the child. And of course, now we have the science to prove it. But this adult appeal is a key factor in Sesame Seeds, because our content will become a catalyst to promote that critical adult-child engagement. And third, our not-so-secret weapon, our Muppets. You know, children the world over are deeply connect with these Muppets. They form special bonds, helping them feel less alone, but also making them more receptive to the lessons they're seeing and hearing. So with Sesame Seeds, we will introduce new local Muppets with stories that children can relate to. Perhaps a Muppet that had to leave their home or lives in a tent and becomes best friends with their new neighbor. And since the majority of refugee families actually do not live in refugee camps, but in neighborhoods and host communities, Sesame Seeds will reach refugee children side by side with their new neighbors. Their new Muppet friends will model respect and understanding and inclusion of differences such as gender and disabilities, always from a child's perspective. So behind me, that's Tantan. She's from Jordan. We visited the refugee camp in Zaatri together, and I got to watch children light up in delight meeting her.
Marhaba!
Tantan, I'm so glad you made it.
Miss Sherry!
I'm so glad you're here.
So glad to be here. You visited me and my friends in Jordan.
Yes.
Now I visit you and your friends.
Thank you.
You have a lot of friends, Miss Sherry.
Well, I did meet a fair amount of new friends this morning.
And since you've been to Jordan, I met some new friends too. Guess what, Miss Sherry?
What?
I have a new best friend. Her name is Amal. She's for Leichtenton, and she's from Syria. Yes, and we like to sing and dance, and we count like this.
That's great.
Like this, Miss Sherry. واحد, اتنين, تلاتة, أربعة.
Very good.
But you know something, Miss Sherry?
What?
Sometimes Amal, she gets sad because she had to leave her home in Syria. Yes, and at night she gets nightmares. So Tintin tries to make her feel better.
Oh, well, she's so lucky to have you as a friend, Tantan.
I can't wait for you to meet her.
Well, I can't wait either, but you know what? I think that you're showing children that you don't have to be from the same place to be friends, and that's a really wonderful lesson.
Yes, Miss Sherry.
But I can't wait to meet her.
Me too. And you know what? I can't wait to tell all my friends about meeting all of you, Miss Sherry's friends. شكرا 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 Miss Sherry.
Thank you for being here.
سلام. Bye.
So our vision is for Sesame Seeds to be a model for humanitarian response around the globe, not just for Tauntaun's friends in the Middle East, but for refugee children wherever they may be. For every displaced child to have what those of us here take for granted, the laughter and learning that Sesame brings. Sesame Seeds can give these children the tools they need to thrive. And if not, what's to happen to 2-year-old Ghazi or the millions of children just like him? How can they be expected to reach their full potential or have the skills they need to rebuild their societies? And what does that mean for the future of the region and for the rest of the world?
That is the right question, isn't it? It goes to the heart of this competition and its founding idea. Because when we first heard about a $100 million prize, we thought it was a challenge to do things differently, not an invitation to do more of the same. It was a call to disrupt things, not to defend them. And our two organizations were born of disruption. We were created to challenge comfortable thinking. In the 1930s, Albert Einstein, a refugee in New York, was tortured by the thought that he was safe while the extermination of European Jews, was being planned and executed in occupied Europe. He created the International Rescue Committee to address their plight. In the 1960s, Joan Ganz Cooney and the Carnegie Corporation saw the burning injustice that was the fuel of the civil rights movement here in the United States. They vowed to create in Sesame Street something that would use the power of television to ensure that the most disadvantaged children in America got the chance to arrive at school ready to learn. Today, the challenge is different. It's the global refugee crisis, the world closing its doors on refugees, child refugees getting the worst deal of all. But although the question or the challenge is different, the issue for us, all of us, is the same. The issue is, just like Einstein, just like Joan Ganz Cooney, do we address the problem or do we turn our backs on it? The refugee crisis isn't just a trial for the refugees. It's a test of all of us. And here's the biggest point that we want to leave you with today. This is a test that we can pass. Don't believe the fatalists who will tell you that the refugee crisis is insoluble. It isn't. In our power, in the plan that we've described to you today, is the chance and the responsibility to change the lives of a generation. We know that early intervention is the best intervention. We know that combining digital technology and in-person services, mass reach and face-to-face contact is the recipe for high impact in a social program. And we know too that when you deliver returns on investment of the scale that I've described today, when you build a model with an evidence base of the kind we've described today, we will have donors beating down the door to scale and sustain the program. I defer to no one in my belief in the power of governments to make a difference, to be a force for good around the world. But I know this. I know when governments need someone else to lead. Now is such a time. This is such an issue. And that is our opportunity. To plant a flag around which global opinion can rally. A flag of innovation, a flag of compassion, a flag of creativity, a flag of humanity. It's there, waiting for us. The largest early childhood development intervention in a humanitarian setting ever. The refugee children, they're waiting for us. We cannot, we must not let them down. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you to the Sesame Workshop and the International Rescue Committee, and of course to Tauntaun, who I think stole the show. You all give us hope that children, whatever their circumstance, can have what they so deserve, the opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just getting started. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to hear from our second world-changing finalist. Stay with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will return with the next presentation in approximately 5 minutes. Please feel free to use this time to interact with other guests and take a quick break. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will continue momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will continue momentarily.
So we know what hunger is. Hunger is a lack of food, but we often hear about that. What we don't hear about is hidden hunger. That is something a little more subtle, possibly more insidious. There are 2 billion people suffering from a lack of necessary vitamins and minerals in their diet. Our next finalist is determined to do something about that. HarvestPlus has made it their mission to not only develop bio-fortified nutritious crops, but also to deliver them so that every child, woman, and man has access to sustainable, staple crops. With us today to share their passion and commitment to ending hidden hunger in Africa, we have 2 members of the HarvestPlus team. In a moment, we'll hear from Eliab Simpungwe of HarvestPlus Zambia. But first, please welcome the CEO of HarvestPlus, Bev Postma.
Exactly 1 year ago today, I was in Rwanda. I was traveling with our field team to a remote village in Mahanga province, where HarvestPlus has been working for more than 7 years. As we walked up the dusty lane, I was introduced to Rosalind. Rosalind is a 35-year-old single mother and farmer. She has 6 children between the ages of 2 and 15. Her husband died 2 years ago, and Rosalind runs the farm. Rosalind showed me around her garden, as she calls it, a 1-acre patch of precious earth that is the sole source of food and income for her family. In the course of a year, Rosalind must plant and grow enough food on this plot to not just feed her children, but also generate a surplus to earn an income. Rosalind proudly showed me around her mix of crops: beans, sweet potato, and a small patch of corn, which is known as maize in Africa. This is everything the family will grow and consume. It's a typical farm in Rwanda, where women are all the smallholders. Rosalind told me she was first introduced to HarvestPlus and our healthier crops 4 years ago by the head of the farming association in her village. Other mothers were already talking about these crops, saying they not only grow well, but they can help ward off sickness like diarrhea and blindness. Now, Rosalind said she was skeptical at first, but she carved out a small portion of her 1-acre lot and switched some of her sweet potato for vitamin A sweet potato and some of her beans for high iron beans. She didn't want to take the risk with her maize in that first year, as this was her most precious crop. It didn't take long, though, for Rosalind to convert more of her farm to biofortified crops and switch from white maize to orange vitamin A maize. She told me that in the last 4 years, she has seen many benefits from growing these more nutritious crops. She'd noticed that her younger children had fewer cases of diarrhea and were needing fewer trips to the local clinic. Her older children seemed more alert and able to focus on their homework. Her new crops were also growing very well, and despite some serious problems with drought in the region, her overall yields had increased, and she was able to do well at market, especially with her high iron beans and orange maize. Before we left, Rosalind grasped my hands and told me she'd never expected such a small and simple change to make such a big difference to her family. She thanked me and HarvestPlus, and she said, "It's like I'm now growing health in my garden." Now, while Rosalind holds a special place in my heart, her story is not unique, but one of many experiences of the farmers and communities that are working with HarvestPlus in Africa and around the world. Thanks to our donors and partners, we've already reached more than 26 million people globally with more nutritious, biofortified versions of everyday food crops. Since 2012, we've been working with more than 400 partners to get these crops into the hands of farmers and give them the tools they need to tackle the global crisis of hidden hunger. Hidden hunger occurs because hundreds of millions of families like Rosalind's rely upon basic, staple food crops, things like corn and cassava, as their main source of food. Foods like vegetables and proteins are just not affordable, and this price gap is growing, not shrinking. Sadly, children are the primary victims of this less visible form of hidden hunger. Recent research by Harvard Medical School revealed these shocking images of the difference between the brain of a healthy, well-nourished child on the left and the brain of a child whose growth has been stunted due to malnutrition. The World Health Organization identifies vitamin A, iron, and zinc as 3 micronutrients that are most lacking in diets globally. These deficiencies are the underlying cause of so many preventable diseases and premature deaths. Iron deficiency affects more people than any other condition in the world, causing devastating anemia, cognitive impairment, and death during childbirth. Zinc deficiency affects about 1/3 of the world's population, causing stunting, and it's responsible for 18% of malaria cases and 10% of all diarrheal disease. And I can't bear the fact that up to 500,000 mothers will watch their children go blind this year just because they don't get enough vitamin A in their diets. These deficiencies come at a crippling cost to national economies due to the lack of productivity and lost potential. That's why the global community has set very clear targets through the UN Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty and all forms of malnutrition by 2030. Our global food system is broken, and we need an urgent solution if we are to meet these goals. The good news is we have many of the tools to meet these goals. We just need the right political will and financial momentum to scale them up. The idea of biofortification was first pioneered 25 years ago by a leading agricultural economist, Dr. Howdy Buis. Now, Howdy met initial resistance for his idea to tackle health through agriculture, but he persevered, and he gathered a group of leading researchers in nutrition and plant science to prove beyond doubt that it is possible to provide a natural and cost-effective way to tackle hidden hunger simply by letting the plants do some of the work.
Let food be thy medicine. A quote attributed to Hippocrates best captures the groundbreaking effort by Howdy Buis to dramatically reduce micronutrient and vitamin deficiency across the globe. The world has long struggled with malnutrition. Even today, micronutrient deficiency affects 2 billion people worldwide, and the impact is especially severe among children. Poor nutrition causes nearly half of the deaths in children under age 5, taking nearly 3 million lives a year. And in that same age group, 190 million have vitamin A deficiency, and 155 million are stunted. It was a commitment to confronting this problem that led Howdy to search for a way to infuse essential vitamins and minerals into the staple crops people eat every day, to literally have their food become the medicine that would prevent the devastation of malnutrition. Howdy's research led to a major breakthrough known as biofortification, the process of selectively breeding food crops to increase their micronutrient content. Howdy worked with colleagues at Cornell University to demonstrate the effectiveness of biofortification, showing how breeding for high seed mineral content was a win-win proposition because it resulted in both higher plant yields and improved human nutrition. Now, thanks to biofortification, tens of millions of people at risk of micronutrient deficiencies have the chance of eating more nutritious foods and living healthier, more productive lives. While biofortification takes time and patience, its impact lasts a lifetime. Once farmers start planting biofortified crops, they like the crop's traits so much that they continue growing them season after season and across even larger areas, while also sharing their knowledge and planting material with their neighbors, empowering farmers to create healthier food for themselves, their families, and their communities.
So, after $380 million in research funding in the last decade from our amazing early donors like the UK, the US, and the Canadian government, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, HarvestPlus has developed more than 175 varieties of these common staple food crops. Today, families are already benefiting from vitamin A cassava, vitamin A corn, vitamin A sweet potato, iron beans, iron pearl millet, zinc rice and zinc wheat. As with many good ideas, the beauty of biofortification lies in its simplicity. Our nutritionists start by visiting communities where the need is most acute. They examine what people are growing, cooking, and eating every day. Our goal is to make the switch to nutrition as easy as possible by offering a like-for-like swap for what is already on plates and growing on farms. Our researchers then trawl through old seed banks looking for naturally nutritious versions of these everyday crops. They cross them with modern varieties, using traditional plant breeding techniques as opposed to genetic modification. They aim for the nutrient targets set by our nutritionists while maintaining the high yields. After many years, they finally produce a new biofortified crop that will grow even in harsh conditions caused by climate change, while packing a nutritional punch. Once the crops are approved for release by national authorities in our target countries, our field teams then work with governments and local partners, such as seed companies, to introduce the crops to local farmers, using existing extension services and seed markets to stimulate the switch. Biofortified seeds cost the farmer the same as their usual varieties. They are just as easy to grow, and they have the added benefit of being extra nutritious. The switch is easy. There's no trade-off in terms of yield or input costs. These crops provide between 25 to 100% of daily requirements for vitamin A, iron, and zinc, giving children the opportunity to live, learn, and grow to their full body and brain potential. The impact of this simple change in the global food system is profound and proven. Research has shown that children who ate vitamin sweet potato in Mozambique experienced reduced prevalence and duration of diarrhea. In Rwanda, young women who consumed iron beans every day saw a total reversal in iron deficiency in just 4.5 months, improving both their physical and their cognitive performance. And in Zambia, children were able to see better at night after regularly eating vitamin A maize. No one sees the real impact of this switch more than our dedicated field teams who are working every day with farmers and communities on the adoption of these crops. I am honored to introduce you to one of our leaders in the field, Dr. Eliab Sapungwe. Eliab is country manager of HarvestPlus Zambia. He obtained his PhD in environmental sciences from Wageningen University and his MSc in economics and planning from Reading University. As you will hear, Eliab is a fierce advocate for the adoption of biofortification.
Thank you. Thank you, Bev. Good morning, everyone. First, let me say I'm greatly honored to represent the HarvestPlus family out there in the field. Now, I grew up in a remote village in northern part of Zambia by the borders of Tanzania. And it's a farming community, and farming is the lifeblood of that local economy. I was the youngest in a family of 3 sons, and my young mother, beautiful right there, went on to have 2 of my young sisters after that picture. And that was my Sunday best. My family retired from a copper mine and settled on a small farm, growing maize and beans. And I remember we ate white sweet potato for breakfast, and white maize for lunch and dinner. And most families in the village, in the community where I lived, ate a pretty similar diet. In Zambia, the rates of malnutrition have remained pretty much the same since the early 90s. 40% of kids under 5 are stunted. And 1 in every 2 kids of preschool age are deficient in vitamin A. But my government is doing a lot of work to reverse the trend. For instance, our sugar companies are required by law to fortify sugar with vitamin A. And mothers have to line up at rural health centers to receive vitamin A capsules for their young children twice every year. Now, for most families, the distance to the nearest rural health center can be punishing, and the sugar cost beyond their reach. Now, that's why I was so passionate about joining HarvestPlus. When I learned that the maize, grown by 98% of rural households, a food that I've eaten all my life, sometimes 3 times a day, can just as easily deliver vitamin A to these families. Now, you see, in Zambia, maize is typically white, and we use it to prepare a stiff porridge we call shima, our staple food. And when I joined HarvestPlus some 7 years ago, I wondered at the back of my mind whether biofortified maize, orange in appearance, would be accepted by my communities. But that question, that lingering question, was quickly answered one day when I first attended the Farmers' Field Day gathering. I arrived with a big bag of vitamin A orange maize at the gathering of some 2,000 farmers, my contribution to the lunch that day, and as a way of introducing the crop to the community. Now, when I presented it to the group of mothers in the lunch committee, they looked at it, at first skeptical. And then I explained quickly that it looks orange because it's enriched with vitamin A. So they accepted, they agreed to cook it for lunch for the gathering. And at lunchtime, armed with my camera and excited and eager to see farmers eat this version of orange in shima, I walked, from table to table, ready to take the pictures, but I was disappointed to find that on every table I went to, it was the traditional white in shima that was being served. Surprised, I quickly rushed back to the mothers in the lunch committee and asked what happened. And with smiles, they explained that they kept it to take it back to their children. They said if it really contained vitamin A, then their children deserved it more than the gathering of adults. At that point, I knew that vitamin A orange maize was going to be accepted by our communities, and the mothers were going to lead the way in its use. Now, today, HarvestPlus is working with African seed companies to increase the availability of biofortified maize. This will help us to scale up the work that we're doing with the World Food Program and the Zambian government to roll out vitamin A maize in the school feeding programs. Now, with more investment, we can accelerate these programs and reach more children. It gives me a sense of great pride working for these programs, knowing that the next generation of children from my village, from Zambia, and indeed from the rest of Africa, will not face the same odds of malnutrition that I did.
Thank you, Eliab. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Eliab's experiences in Zambia reflect change that is happening all around the world right now. Biofortification has been described as the next big movement in food. Consumers everywhere are demanding a healthy, natural, more sustainable solution to their everyday food. We're already seeing some early interest from major food companies who wish to invest in biofortified ingredients for things like breakfast cereals and healthy snacks. Right now, though, we have a supply problem, not a demand problem. Our teams are working at full stretch to meet this demand, while overcoming all the usual barriers of working in developing countries. We don't yet have the capacity to accelerate production, but we do have an overwhelming interest and support from governments, the World Bank, and the food industry. We are truly at a tipping point of taking biofortification to scale, but we need to do so responsibly and sustainably, working with African smallholders like Rosalind to secure their place in the global supply chain. Our initial funding allowed us to develop the proof of concept, to show that biofortification works. We've completed the first 3 phases of this journey. 100&Change will allow us to accelerate our rollout, focusing in Africa, where HarvestPlus has the greatest experience and where the level of need is still most acute. We plan to invest $100 million in a rapid expansion, growing our operations from 6 to 17 countries, to mainstream biofortification and reach at least 100 million people by 2022. This will serve as a blueprint to roll out to the rest of the world, to achieve our vision, our long-term goal, and Howdy's dream of making nutrition the default setting in staple food crops and reaching 1 billion people by 2030. Our implementation plan focuses on 4 areas that will both generate supply, the push, and stimulate demand, the pull, to scale up biofortification and position it for long-term growth and sustainability. First, we need to create the right policy environment. Governments like Nigeria, Rwanda, and Uganda have already added biofortification to their national agriculture and nutrition strategies. But we need to reach more countries, more governments. Second, we need to scale up our support to governments as they test, adapt, and further improve biofortified varieties for local release. You see, this creates real ownership at a country level and ensures the seeds are made available in the first instance as public goods. Third, we need to expand our farm gate work and work with local partners and farmers to invest in more crop demonstration plots, farmer training days, and health education to take biofortification to more farmers in more countries and catalyze widespread adoption. In parallel, we must scale up investment in our go-to-market strategies to stimulate consumer demand for biofortified products, both locally and globally, through nutrition messaging, social marketing, and mass media campaigns. To truly embed biofortification into the global food system, we need to make naturally fortified food the new normal. Once exposed to biofortified foods, we know consumers like them. We just need to scale up awareness, connect farmers to markets, and introduce standards. When I was in Nigeria last month, I spent some time with our amazing regional marketing team. Many of them, like me, have a background in brand marketing with the major food companies. They introduced me to Atinuka Labile. She's the co-founder of Kato Foods. She and her team are working with HarvestPlus to develop new, innovative food products like local children's favourites, custard, which, as you can see, to my surprise, tasted an awful lot like custard, but it's made from yellow cassava. It offers up to 40% of a child's daily requirement for vitamin A. With the right investment, we know we can successfully deploy these strategies to increase both supply and demand, to reach 100 million people in Africa in the next 5 years. We've spent the last 15 years designing the crops, testing and refining our delivery and scale models, and growing an international network of partners that are so crucial to local success. Farmers and seed companies have readily adopted all biofortified crops in Africa once they're exposed to them. By the end of last year, we were reaching nearly 4 million farming households. That's 20 million people. In Rwanda, in just a few short years, 22% of bean farmers are now growing high-iron beans. Consumers have expressed a preference for the look, taste, and health benefits of vitamin A in blind taste trials. And look, even the former First Lady grew vitamin A sweet potato in the White House garden a few years ago to tout its health benefits. Eliab and I are part of this amazing global team of 170 passionate staff. 10 of us are here today, including our founder, Dr. Howdy Buis, who's traveled all the way from the warmth of the Philippines to be here today in Chicago. Between us, we are specialists in crop development, seed systems, marketing, nutrition, advocacy, and brand communications. Together, we have the collective experience and partnerships to take this movement to scale. 20 years ago, biofortification was just an idea. 10 years ago, it was an exciting R&D program with a lot to prove. Today, we have a unique and scalable solution to one of the world's biggest social challenges. We find ourselves at a unique moment in time. Right now, this is the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition. And for the first time, we have the knowledge, the tools, the evidence, and the political leadership to achieve a nutrition revolution. With the right investment, we can give biofortification the huge nudge it needs to make Rosalind's story the norm rather than the exception. With $100 million, biofortification can change the lives of 100 million people in Africa in just 5 years, just by turning their crops into medicine. Imagine what can be achieved if we reverse the effects of nutrient deficiency on this scale in Africa and give every child the opportunity to live, learn, and grow to their full potential. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks to HarvestPlus. They've shined a spotlight on a critical problem, and they've proposed a proven solution. Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking our second short break, and then we'll hear from our third finalist.
We will now take a short break. Please feel free to leave your seats and interact with other guests. We will return with the next presentation in approximately 5 minutes.
Yeah! A meal without beans and rudder is just like a meal without food.
Ibishimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha birimo n'intungamubiri. Biraryoha tutabirya n'uguhomba.
Okay, abana barya ibishyimbo bitari mu butare, mu mibiri yabo haburamo abasirikare, bakabaho bagaragara nk'abananiwe, bakagira n'ikibazo cyo kwibagirwa. Urya ibishyimbo biri mu butare arakomera, ntabwo yibagirwa, ntabwo ahondobera. Ejo hazaza he haba ari heza kuko akomeye, abafite amaraso ku kigero gikenewe.
Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ni nk'urukingo rurinda kubura amaraso. Abana bakiri bato, abagore batwite, ntibikabure ku ifunguro ryabo rya buri munsi. Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha, birimo n'intungamubiri, biraryoha, kutabirya ni uguhomba. Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha, birimo n'intungamubiri, biraryoha, kutabirya ni uguhomba. Biraryoha. Umuntu wariye ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ahorana imbaraga n'imirimo y'ingufu arayishobora, kuko azira ubugwari, kuko azira ubunebwe. Genda wa bishyimbo we niko kutakuza arakubarira.
Inzara dore ibishyimbo byera vuba, muhinzi yihinga ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare. Inzara dore ibishyimbo byera vuba, muhinzi yihinga ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare.
We mugore utwite ukeneye ibi bishyimbo kuko utakaza amaraso menshi ubyara. Ibi bishyimbo bifite ubutare ni byiza, ibi bishyimbo bifite ubutare ni byiza. Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha, birimo n'intungamubiri, biraryoha, kutabirya ni uguhomba. Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha, birimo n'intungamubiri, biraryoha, kutabirya ni uguhomba. Biraryoha.
Ese ni iki cyakubuza nawe kwigerera kuri aya majyambere ahebuje? Byose bitangira ubihinga iwawe ukabigabura, maze uyu munsi ukabaho neza wowe n'abawe. Gera vuba umusaruro bikuba ijana, kuryoha ntiwabigereranya, maze ibintu bigahinduka, imbaraga ukazibarusha, abana amashuri bakayahanika, ababyeyi bakaba bazima, kuko ibi bishyimbo by'ubutare byatashye iwawe.
Wowe mugore ni wowe mutima w'urugo, gaburira umuryango wawe indyo yuzuye. Baha ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare, ubundi bagira ubuzima buzira umuze. Aya moko 10 y'ibishyimbo akungahaye ku butare kurusha ayandi moko yose dusanzwe tuzi, kandi ubu yageze ku isoko n'abacuruzi b'inyongeramusaruro barayafite. Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha, birimo n'intungamubiri, biraryoha, kutabirya ni uguhomba. Ibishyimbo bikungahaye ku butare ntibikabure ku ifunguro rya buri munsi. Biraryoha, birimo n'intungamubiri, biraryoha, kutabirya ni uguhomba. Biraryoha.
HarvestPlus provide you with better crops, better nutrients.
Maniji, watiletera letera. Ezike, watiletera letera. Heitino, watiletera letera. Better nutrients.
HarvestPlus provide you with better crops, better nutrients.
You know, come to me, come follow, hey. Ikafika mvula lero ni kushanga orange mess. Sunutwa mikonga no wafama. Ikabwera mvula lero ni kushanga orange mess. For a better harvest, orange mess. For a better life, orange mess. Muli vitamin A, orange mess. For your good health, orange mess. Come to me, come follow, hey. Ikafika mvula lero ni kushanga orange.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next presentation is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next presentation is about to begin.
Continue your tweeting. Don't mean to interrupt. So what comes to mind when you think of technological innovation in healthcare? If you're here and you're fortunate enough to live in the United States or a developed land, you might think it's a piece of wearable technology, one that counts our steps and tracks our heart rate. Maybe it's a state-of-the-art imaging machine that can detect illness earlier. But what about those not quite as fortunate? What about those living in Africa, a place where more than 1 million newborns die each year from what are mostly preventable causes? Preventable, but only if life-saving technologies, many of which we take for granted, are available. Our next finalist team has been working together to develop life-saving technologies for 10 years. Welcome Rice 360 Institute for Global Health. Dr. Queen Dube from the University of Malawi, Rebecca Richards-Kortum from Rice University, Robert Meir Ross from Third Stone Design, and Joy Lawn from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine.
Every year in Africa, 1.1 million newborn babies die. Most of these deaths could be easily prevented, but existing life-saving tools are too expensive or break down in the harsh conditions of African hospitals.
That's why we created Nest, a special portfolio of newborn essential solutions and technologies designed specifically to work in Africa to be effective, affordable, and sustainable.
With 100&Change, we will complete the innovations to Nest. We will distribute Nest to hospitals across Africa, and we will continually measure its impact to improve results.
1.1 million newborns died in Africa this year. That's why your investment is needed in Nest now.
My name is Queen Dube. I'm a pediatrician working in Malawi. I look after newborn babies. Every day I go to work, I see babies die. And the most painful bit for a doctor is actually knowing that you could have saved those lives if you had the tools to enable you to do so. Sadly, what I see in my hospital is happening all across Africa. So every year in Africa, we lose 1.1 million newborns. The heartbreak is, ladies and gentlemen, 75% of those deaths are actually preventable. Preventable with technologies that have been available in the United States for over 50 years. What actually kills these newborns hasn't changed over the past 100 years. It's either they are born too early, they have an infection on board, or they suffer from some birth-related trauma. My hospital back home, every year, around about June, July, we receive container full of donated equipment. It's a joyful moment. But the equipment fails. It doesn't save the babies because the devices are not tailor-made to withstand the harsh African environments, the heat, the dust, the frequent power outages, and we don't have the spare parts to fix the technologies. So the equipment ends up in the equipment graveyard. This is a picture of the equipment graveyard in my hospital. At the end of my long shift, I go there and I pay my respects. These technologies, donated technologies, they don't save the babies they're supposed to save. What Africa needs is a solution. Africa needs technologies that are effective, technologies that are affordable, technologies that are sustainable, equipment that doesn't just break down. And that's what this team, the NEST team, is all about. NEST standing for Newborn Essential Solutions and Technologies. As a team, we've developed a package of 17 technologies, a package that addresses all the three major killers of a newborn, addresses nutrition, infection, birth-related trauma, jaundice. The baby you see in the middle is on breathing support. On top of us supporting their breathing, they need to be kept warm. They need to feed. If they have an infection on board, an African doctor should be able to treat them. And that's what NEST is all about. What really excites me as an African is the cost of NEST, delivered at scale. Ladies and gentlemen, NEST as a package actually costs $1.48 per birth delivered at scale. But for us as a team to bring it to scale, we need a $100 million investment. NEST is ready to scale. 3 things that we're going to do as a team: innovate, complete the package, we'll distribute the package. First, in my home country, Malawi, home is best. Tanzania, Nigeria, the rest of Africa. What about Asia? Brazil, Nepal. We want NEST to be there. We want to measure the impact of NEST. How many lives are we going to save? As a team, we are more than ready to make sure that NEST is available, ensuring that these African newborns have a secure environment, closing the survival gap for Africa. We're in the SDG era, Sustainable Development Goals, where everybody says, leaving no one behind. And as a team, we are ready not to leave that African newborn behind. So many African newborns, 30 years from today, they share this stage. To tell you how we plan to build the NEST is the mama of the team, a great engineer, powerful innovator, who will take us through how we plan to build the NEST. Rebecca.
Thank you, Queen. When the 100&Change initiative came out, we knew it was our chance, together with Queen and her colleagues, to make sure that clinicians all across Africa have the tools they need to help babies survive. $100 million means the chance to solve this problem. It is within our grasp. Our solution has 3 parts. It begins with innovation. We will deliver the 17 life-saving innovations of the NEST package. We will partner with nursing schools, with medical schools, and with engineering schools to train the clinicians, the technicians, and the engineers who are dedicated to improving newborn survival. Hospitals in Africa, they need a simple way to order Nest. We will solve this problem by establishing a nonprofit distributor. By the end of 100&Change, this distributor will be financially sustainable, creating a permanent solution. Now, we know that we can't scale Nest without broad demand. We need demand from governments, from WHO, from UNICEF, and also from the private sector. Generating that demand requires rigorous evidence, and we will measure the number of lives that are saved by Nest and the cost to save those lives. And we will use that data to generate multi-country demand. How do we know that we can do this? Because we have already done it for the first Nest technology. I will never forget my first visit to Queen's Hospital in 2005. I saw many tiny babies like Chikanjetso, who you see here fighting to breathe. And Queen, she explained to me that half of babies who are born too soon, they struggle to breathe because their lungs are immature. And we know that without treatment, most of these babies will die. She also took me to the equipment graveyard at her hospital, and she explained why the breathing machines that are used in America do not work in her hospital. Now, I'm an engineering professor. My job is to teach students how to build new innovations to solve real problems. So we got to work. We got to work with Queen and her team, and we designed a breathing machine that was effective, that was affordable, and that was sustainable. And we have our first prototype here today, and I gotta tell you, when we showed that it delivered the same therapeutic flow and pressure as breathing machines used in the United States, we were so excited. And we got on a plane and we proudly took it to Queen and we showed it to her. And she told us everything that was wrong with it. She said, it's in a shoebox, it's too flimsy, it's gonna break. You have tubes coming out the front and tubes coming out the back. They need to be polarized, the buttons need pictorial icons. But she said, can we keep it? Can we use it to start treating our babies? And so we worked and we made all of the improvements that they requested. And we were so fortunate to receive one of the very first Saving Lives at Birth grants from USAID. And we worked with Queen to measure the impact of this technology. And we showed that for premature babies treated with this breathing device, survival went up by 40%. And that mirrors the improvement that was seen when this technology was introduced in the United States in the late 1960s. Together, we named the device Pumani. It's a Malawian word that means breathe restfully. And with this data in hand, we partnered with Malawi's Ministry of Health. We got more support from USAID. We got support from Elma Philanthropies. And we were able to roll Pumani out to every hospital in the country. And we trained nurses and doctors to use it. Today, Pumani is saving lives in every hospital in the country. It costs less than 1/10 the price of systems used in the United States. Pumani worked. It worked even in district hospitals. Instead of ending up in the graveyard, it is up in the newborn unit. We thought we were done. But in rolling Pumani out, we saw babies who were cold. We saw babies who had jaundice. And we met many clinicians who were frustrated. They didn't have the tools they needed to treat these conditions. And so we went back to work. Since 2006, our team has worked with hundreds of engineering students in the United States, in Malawi, and in Nigeria. And with support from the Lemelson Foundation and from the Fogarty Center, together, these students have created many other newborn technologies. That became the Nest. In assembling the Nest, We included not just our own innovations, but we looked at the medical marketplace to find the very best other innovations, and together put together a package that allowed Queen to have what she needs to treat those babies. Now, this afternoon, you will have a chance to come and see all 17 of those technologies in our breakout room. I am so excited for you to see it. It's awesome. Today, I only have the chance to tell you about 3. Left untreated, newborn jaundice can cause brain damage and death. District hospitals often don't have the tools they need to diagnose jaundice. This $150 reader can diagnose jaundice at the bedside in less than 2 minutes with 1 drop of blood for less than 5 cents per test. If a baby has jaundice, there's another tool in the nest that they can immediately use to treat jaundice, these phototherapy lights. They are made by a nonprofit called DREV. They're commercially available, but they're not distributed in Africa. And so if Queen wants to order these lights, it costs more in shipping to get them to her hospital than the lights actually cost. Our nonprofit distributor will solve this problem. Finally, hypothermia is such a challenge for newborn babies in Africa. They're tiny, they lose heat so quickly, and we know for every 1 degree that their temperature drops, the chance they will die goes up by 28%. You can't tell by looking if a baby is too cold. This $50 reusable temperature monitor clips right onto the crib side, and with just a glance, a nurse can know if a baby is too cold and immediately intervene to warm them up. So are we ready to roll out these 17 technologies? The good news is that 8 of them are already commercially available. They are just not yet distributed in Africa, and our nonprofit distributor will solve this challenge. We have 4 more that are in successful multi-center clinical trials, and with investment from 100&Change, we will take them to products in 24 to 27 months. We will take working prototypes of the last 5 to products within 36 months. The power of value engineering is that these are simple technologies and the development timelines are predictable. Remember, each one of these technologies, it began with a team of students. Students who learned to use the process of innovation to solve a real problem. Students who had a chance to see their work have an impact on someone else's life. And I think these students, they are our most important product because they are what will keep the cycle of innovation going after 100&Change ends. With just $6 million, we took Pumani from a shoebox prototype to a medical product that is not used just in 37 hospitals in Malawi. It is saving newborn lives in 30 countries. With $100 million, we are ready. We are ready to deliver the 17 life-saving innovations of Nest. We are ready to solve the challenge of distributing medical products in Africa. And we are ready to measure the impact of this technology and use that data to drive uptake across Africa. We are ready to save hundreds of thousands of newborn lives every year. Now, to crack the distribution nut, we know we need the right partner, and we are so fortunate to be joined by Robert Miros. Robert shares our commitment to distribution at nonprofit rates so that these technologies are available to the poorest families. When I look back on the journey of Pumani, I know we could not have taken it from this shoebox to a medical product without Robert's partnership.
When I joined the Nest team in 2012, my company was already developing medical devices for global health applications. We specialize in product design and have a unique focus on bringing global health products to market. Our challenge with Pumani was to take that shoebox prototype and transform it into a real medical product. As you can see here, we took the concept through several stages in development and advanced it to a final successful design. In 2 years, we secured the CE mark and found the right manufacturing partner to produce the devices according to global quality standards. In 2015, we began selling the lowest cost, easiest to use, all-in-one breathing machine on the planet. Today, there are 1,000 Pumani machines in use and in production. And Pumani is saving newborn lives in 30 countries across the globe. We proved that we can go from a prototype to large-scale manufacture for a single medical device and offer it at an affordable price. So how do we replicate this success for the rest of the products in Nest? The challenge lies in the distribution system. For purposes of illustration, let me walk you through the costs involved in making, selling, and distributing one Pumani unit. The unit costs us $550 to manufacture. We sell it into the market for $800, leaving us $250 for sales, engineering, and regulatory costs. Then Pumani leaves a warehouse and gets on an airplane. When it lands in country, it goes through customs and regulatory clearances. Then we deliver it to a hospital where we conduct training for healthcare providers. And to assure long-term functionality, we provide service and technical support. And though it varies somewhat from country to country, these costs add up to about $750. So what started out as an affordable product with a reasonable margin in the beginning ends up with a $500 downstream loss every time one leaves our warehouse. This is where Nest comes in, though, and why it's so exciting. Though the cost of goods for the devices and the sales price is necessarily higher because we're offering an entire bundle of products, the relative distribution costs are much less. This is possible because the distribution activities involved for a breathing machine or a tool to diagnose jaundice or a temperature monitor are all essentially the same. So when we deliver all the devices together and we conduct the training all together and we send one service technician to service the whole suite all in one visit, we effectively spread the costs over the whole suite, becoming sustainable in the process. So how are we going to achieve this? We start by distributing Nest in Malawi, Tanzania, and Nigeria. We set up distribution hubs in Tanzania and Nigeria, and from those places, we then reach the other 4 African countries that have pledged with UNICEF to cut newborn mortality in half in the next 5 years. These 7 countries account for 46% of the births in Africa, and we believe will bring us to a tipping point for the continent. This is the power of the 100&Change grant. It breaks through the initial barriers to effective distribution and allows for economies of scale for Nest, which allow the overall enterprise to become self-sustaining indefinitely. And perhaps even more important, we'll be establishing a functional market, so that those future medical innovators that we're educating will have a place to take their products year after year and close that health equity gap in the next decade. Without 100&Change, we'll be stuck in a business as usual situation, one product at a time with incremental health benefits and high costs of distribution. With 100&Change, we'll build a sustainable distribution system that will allow us to deliver world-class medical products. And after 100&Change is spent, we'll have a financially sustainable way for Nest to achieve its long-term goal of saving 500,000 newborn lives per year. Now, as any of you in business know, just because you build it doesn't mean they will come. We will have to generate the demand and the global will to recommend and procure this life-saving technology. To drive this demand with measured results, I can think of no one better than Dr. Joy Lawn. If there's one leader that can be credited with shifting the international policy landscape for the care of newborns, it is Joy.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. But what he didn't mention is that my true qualification for standing here today is that I should have been a newborn death. and I should have been a newborn death in the bush in northern Uganda. So this is where my family lived for 20 years. My mother had an obstructed labour. She was taken into this maternity home. No running water, no electricity. She was there overnight, and in the morning, they were able to find somebody who in fact had never done a caesarean section, hadn't been properly trained, but he was able to do a caesarean section. And that saved my life and my mother's life. So I'm standing here today in front of you because people stood up for me and stood up for my mother, because people spoke up for us. And I've spent the last 3 decades working on newborn survival and speaking up for mothers and their babies around the world, and particularly in Africa, as a medical doctor and as a professor of epidemiology. And I've personally seen hundreds of newborn deaths that should not have happened. And today, I'm wearing my Ghanaian funeral dress. And I'm wearing it because this year, 2017, 1.1 million newborn babies died in Africa, most of them preventable, invisible, and yet something that we can and must change. And my job, and the job of our Nest team, is to stand up, to speak up for newborns, and to see that that changes. Well, that sounds great, but maybe we're just a bunch of dreamers. Is this actually possible, or is we are just hoping and wishing? And it is possible. It's possible because of 3 important shifts that mean we can do this now as never before. And the first is that we have powerful evidence about this situation. 99% of the world's newborn deaths actually happen in low and middle income countries, but it's only the last 15 years that we've started to pay attention to those 99% of deaths. We now know where and why those deaths happen. We know that 1/10 of the whole global burden of disease of all conditions all over the planet is actually related to newborn deaths. We have trials showing what we can do at community level with community health workers or with traditional birth attendants. And we know that we can do something, but without providing high quality care in hospitals, we can't truly reduce death and also disability. Well, I used to think that if we published lots of papers, particularly if we managed to publish them in Lancet, and then we got WHO, never the fastest moving organization, but we managed to get lots of global guidelines, that the world would change. Well, about 200 papers and a whole heap of WHO guidelines later, I can tell you, necessary but not sufficient. Why? Because newborns weren't on people's political to-do list. We didn't have political will. So what's the second shift? Is that we do now have political will. In the new Sustainable Development Goals, just launched a couple of years ago, for the first time in history, we have a target that specifies newborn survival. Every country on this planet has to meet that target by the year 2030. So, the newborn has finally emerged on the global agenda. But it's really painful to me as an African, and to Queen, my sister African. We swapped outfits today. She's here in glamorous Gucci, maybe. I hope not. It's painful to me that Africa has the highest risk of newborn death and still the slowest progress. But the good news here again is that African leaders recognize this and they want to change that situation. 7 African countries have pledged to reduce hospital deaths by 50% in 5 years, ambitious target. And here today we're honored to have the Honorable Minister of Health from Nigeria, who's carrying the greatest weight of what needs to be done for Africa, for Africans' newborns. So, That's all very well, but what happens if we can't reach mothers and their newborns? We could have the evidence, we can have the political will, but we can't reach them. So the third shift is that the place of birth has changed. Now, 80% of the world's births happen in hospitals. Big recent shift into hospital wards that in many cases look like this. Poor quality of care, not the right equipment, things in the hospital graveyard, equipment graveyard, as Queen talked about earlier. An opportunity, but also a place maybe where if we fail, women and families will start going back to home instead of coming into hospital. So we need to change this. We have the opportunity, but something different needs to be done. So, never before have we had this opportunity. We have powerful evidence, we have political will, and we now have a place where we can reach women and their babies. And this gives us a platform where Nest now is able to come in and have that impact. But we can only drive that change if we're able to measure the impact and show cost effectiveness. And that's an important component of what the investment of 100&Change would bring. And with 100&Change, we will be able to measure that. So in Malawi, we will learn from what has already worked or not worked for scaling up the package of Nest. We'll move to Tanzania, where shockingly, the neonatal mortality rate is double that within Malawi. And we will measure cost and impact. And then we will work with the rest of these 4 countries in the United Nations network across Africa to pull the lever of larger scale change. Our team, as you have heard, has experts in innovation, in distribution, and in measurement. Our team is composed of unlike minds, slightly unlike accents as well, but with a common passion to change this situation. We are ready to do this, and we will do it together.
Ladies and gentlemen, this year, 1.1 million newborns died in Africa. We could have prevented most of those deaths, only if effective, affordable, and sustainable technologies were available in my continent, Africa.
We are ready to solve this problem by delivering the 17 effective, affordable, and sustainable tools of Nest. It gives clinicians the tools they need to treat and prevent the 3 leading causes of newborn death. And it can be delivered at scale for just $1.48 per birth.
With 100&Change, we will innovate to complete the Nest. We will solve the tough problem of distributing medical devices in Africa, and we will measure the number of newborn lives saved by the Nest.
Without Nest, if we continue business as usual, it's going to be 110 years before a baby born in Africa has the same chance as a baby born here in Chicago. But with Nest, we have the opportunity to close that survival gap, dramatically reducing deaths for newborns in Africa. Here is Chikonjetso. You met him earlier when he was 1 day old, struggling to breathe. Now he's 2, thriving, surviving, and kind of almost smiling. Chikonjetso means the conqueror. With Nest, hundreds of thousands of newborns would also have that opportunity to conquer, to survive, and to thrive. You and I are part of the first generation that can make this change. There are not many things left in global health which are a big problem, but also with big impact. We've got the tools. Our team is ready. African leaders are saying the time is now. With your support, we will deliver. Thank you.
Thanks to their presentation and their commitment to improving the survival rate for newborns in Africa. We're going to take our final brief break before hearing from our fourth finalist.
We will now take a short break. Please feel free to leave your seats and interact with other guests. We will return with the next presentation in approximately 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will continue momentarily.
All right. It is time for our fourth finalist. Last but certainly not least, Catholic Relief Services, along with their partners Lumos and Mistral International, are dedicated to changing the way we care. Families, they will remind you, are the original Department of Health, the Department of Education, Department of Welfare. In their absence, governments and civil societies try to fill the void, often with orphanages. But it's never enough. Nothing can replace the love of a family. Globally, many children in orphanages have a living parent, the vast majority, in fact. The next project is about strengthening these families. It's about connecting children to the services that they need. And it's about creating a culture where children never need to grow up in an orphanage. And it's about doing all of this at a global scale. So welcome Changing the Way We Care from Catholic Relief Services, Shannon Sedefeld, from Mistral International, Philip Goldman, and from Lumos, Georgette Mohair.
8 million children around the world live in orphanages today. The devastating reality is that the majority of those children actually have a living parent. 80 to 90% of children living in orphanages have a parent who is alive, who loves them, most of whom would be happy to take care of them. Unfortunately, many parents make a devastating decision. They have to choose between keeping their child with them at home within their families or placing them in an orphanage where they're often told that the child will have access to education, healthcare, and other services that the families themselves are too impoverished to provide. It's a devastating decision that no parent should have to make, and many children are suffering the consequences. Stephen is one of those children.
Stephen Wusembe was only 5 years old when his mother tragically passed away. That didn't make him an orphan. His father was still alive and living in Kenya, but incapable of caring for him. So the decision was made to place Stephen in an orphanage. He wouldn't leave that orphanage for almost 14 years. Now, I want you to imagine, you're 5 years old, you've just gone through the most traumatic loss imaginable, the loss of your mother. And now you've been thrust into a building with 50 children that you've never met before. And there are 4 adult staff running around barking orders at you. They don't have a minute for the needs of you or the other children. And it's a dangerous place. The place is rife with abuse. The older children prey on the younger and the weak. But there's a time each day in the afternoon when it's worst of all. The staff leave, they take out their keys, and they lock the children in on their own for 2 terrifying, unimaginable hours until the night shift arrived. This was Stephen's childhood. And when he was 18, he was turned out of the orphanage and given an envelope with $100 and told to make his way. Imagine standing on the steps of that orphanage, the Kenyan hot and dusty street in front of you with no friends to turn to, no family to call. Which direction do you go? Stephen asked us to share this story with you today. But Stephen is not alone, is he, George?
No, there are many Stephens in the world, and there are also children like Victoria, who was born in Moldova in 1997, at a time when the country was struggling to become an independent democracy after decades of dictatorship. Victoria's family was struggling with the fact that their beautiful daughter had been born with a disability, and the state authorities were pressuring them to put her into an institution. They refused. And they raised Victoria at home where she was loved and cherished until the age of 7, when her parents were given an impossible choice. They were told that if they wanted Victoria to have an education, the only way that could happen was to send her away to a residential special school 100 miles from home, because there was no inclusive education for children with disabilities in her community. Victoria's parents made that choice because they didn't want to deny her a future. And Victoria says that she was terrified in the institution, that for the first year, she missed home so desperately that she cried every single day. But gradually, she got used to being away from home and in the institution. And after 5 years, she felt more like she was the institution's child rather than her parents' daughter.
Stephen and Victoria sadly are not alone. There are 8 million children right now living in orphanages around the world. 8 million. That's about the size of the population of the greater metropolitan area of Chicago. Imagine the ripple effect of being in these orphanages, what that does to your future relationships. They're deprived of their family's love and their communities on a daily basis. In the future, this will affect every relationship they have. Imagine their relationships with their wives, their husbands, their future children. All of those relationships will be harmed by their orphanage experience. And the 8 million children currently in orphanages quickly will spread and affect many, many more. If each of them has 10 relationships, the 8 million people currently affected by the negative situation of orphanages blooms to 80 million people negatively affected. Why? Philip will show us what life is really like in an orphanage.
So 25 years ago, I visited my first orphanage. It was one of those big Soviet institutions that housed hundreds of children. Now I want you to imagine that you were with me that day, and let's walk in together. It's dark, and your eyes begin to adjust. And you start to see children in the shadows. And you immediately notice that there's something terribly wrong. They're emaciated, malnourished, and that's part of it. Their skin is sallow, yellowed, as if they haven't been outside at all, and in fact, they weren't allowed outside at this particular orphanage. But something else that really strikes you. It's like these children haven't grown into their bodies. They aren't right for their ages. Their development has taken some terrible trajectory that you have difficulty grasping at first. And then something else happens. The children rush you. They surround you, they hug you, the smaller ones jump in your arms. At first, that's very sweet, but there's something wrong with that as well. There's no stranger danger here. A completely unknown adult like myself walks in, and these children crave touch. And a stranger provides an opportunity for contact that they don't get in their regular day. So now let's round the corner together, and we go into a big hall. And this hall is full of cribs. But this isn't a baby home. This is a home for older children. The cribs are filled with children up to their teens. Many of these children are with disability, a rather wide spectrum. Some of them are restrained in the cribs, and you watch them and you watch the staff. The staff really have two jobs, and that is to feed these children on a regular set routine and to change them on a set routine as well. That was all these children with such exceptional needs were receiving throughout their day. And in the orphanages we work in, 40 to 60% of the children that we meet are with disability. That day, I saw the most marginalized and vulnerable children I had ever seen in my life. And they had been completely hidden in these institutions. In fact, for the last 25 years, they've been largely hidden. And this MacArthur 100&Change process is the first time we've seen a huge spotlight put on them. That day, 25 years ago, my life changed forever. Now let's travel to Romania together. The Bucharest Early Intervention Project is a longitudinal study that is actually one of the seminal studies in the effects of toxic stress on children. It was conducted in an orphanage that was actually much worse than the one that I just described. Here in this orphanage, we saw 2 to 3 children in a crib, and those cribs crammed into rooms, the children subjected to the most amazing neglect and deprivation on every measure. Now, I want you to look at this first picture coming up and tell me how old you think this child is. Shout it out. It's a 14-year-old girl. And one more. Shout out, how old? 17-year-old girl. This is not merely the effects of malnutrition. These are the effects of a combination of severe neglect, of toxic stress on the negative side of the balance, and of the lack of nurture, care, and stimulation that every child needs and deserves. Our bodies react biologically to this kind of deprivation in dramatic ways, and particularly in orphanages. We see this a lot in the Central Eastern and Eastern European orphanages, but we've worked in dozens of countries around the world, and we've seen orphanages large and small and public and private. And we know and have seen the effects and have seen the studies showing the dramatic impact on children. Now travel with me to one more country, Vietnam. Hanoi, another large orphanage. There's a sea of cribs in front of you, and this time they're filled with babies, not older children. This is what you hear. Silence. These babies aren't crying, or hardly so. Babies are used to being picked up 100 times a day. They cry all day long when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, when they're sick, when they're just darn bored. And in the rice paddies around this orphanage in Vietnam, you would see poor mothers walking, cultivating their crops, and holding their babies and children. Even in subsistence poverty, the children were receiving the connection that they needed and that critical stimulation. But here, the babies shut down. Crying doesn't elicit a response because, once again, they're served on a routine. They're fed at a set time, and they're changed at a set time, and their world is the crib. Now imagine, these babies, their brains are tripling in size by the age of 2 or 3. Every day matters to these kids. These cribs are the foundation for the rest of their lives. And this is why we feel such a terrific urgency to get these babies out and into safe and nurturing families. Now, these issues have solutions. They're not purely theoretical, they're very practical. And George is going to tell us about them.
As Philip said, some countries around the world have already started to try to solve this problem. It's a problem that the United States and many developed nations moved away from long ago, but you've probably heard less about countries like Sudan. In 2003, I was asked by UNICEF and some local civil society organizations to try and help them with the only baby institution in Khartoum, the country's capital. And at that stage, approximately 1,000 babies were left on the streets of Khartoum every year. These were predominantly newborns, born to young women outside marriage. These were young women who were terrified of their parents' response to their pregnancy, but were even more terrified of being punished under Sharia law. 100 lashes delivered in public. So they left the babies on the streets, and if you can imagine, the life expectancy of a baby on the streets of Khartoum is a few hours. Half the babies died there, and the other half would be admitted to the Mygoma Baby Orphanage, where the mortality rate was 82%. Babies were dying around us every single day. These babies were labeled as illegal, and they were deemed as guilty of their parents' sin. And because of this, there was very little investment in looking after them. There was no milk formula, there were no bottles, there was no sterilizing equipment. Newborn babies were being fed by pouring cups of cow's milk into their mouths. It was a miracle that any of the babies survived at all. But within a year, we had turned this round, and it was my absolute privilege to work together with government, with communities, with civil society, imams, doctors, journalists, human rights lawyers, police officers, and social workers. And together, we built an alternative family care program. Thousands of generous Sudanese families lined up to become emergency foster parents and adoptive families. And the mortality rate in the family program was less than 1%. Even the babies who came in a precarious state of health from the streets to the emergency families were flourishing. And this is because babies who otherwise would have lain in cots all day long in the institution were never out of the arms of their foster mothers and fathers, brothers, sisters, aunties, grannies. The extended family in Sudan came to the rescue. But in order to really solve the problem, we also knew that we had to focus on prevention, because otherwise Sudan would have needed an endless supply of foster parents, which is unsustainable in any country. So we worked quietly behind the scenes with religious leaders, and we built a communications program that changed societal attitudes to these babies and to their mothers. And within 3 years, we had achieved a reinterpretation of Sharia law that decriminalized being a single mother in Sudan. And because of this, it was possible to do prevention work in the community, and today there are more than 7,000 children who are living in their birth families or adoptive families in Sudan who would otherwise have been dead. And part of bringing this to scale and making it sustainable for the long term in a country like Sudan was ensuring that the government would finance it. So we worked with the government to identify a funding stream that could be sustainable for the long term. And the Islamic taxes that are collected from all Sudanese citizens were used to fund the emergency foster care program from 2004 onwards, in a country which over the last 14 years has suffered terrible continued civil war, eruptions of genocide, and a partition of the country. The government has managed to continue to sustain this alternative family care program and continues to do so for the future. So it is possible to solve this, but to solve it on a global scale, one of the key issues that we need to address is that so often, instead of funding the solution, we're funding the problem.
So I'm willing to bet that some of you in this room have supported an orphanage or are part of an organization that has, and if so, your heart is exactly where our heart is. You recognize the incredible vulnerability that these children stripped of family face in their communities. But we really need to understand what we're doing when we write that check. Are these orphanages for orphans? We've already heard from Shannon that 80 to 90% of the children in them are not orphans, and many of the rest have family. So they're not really orphanages. So are they to provide nutrition and shelter for the kids? Well, I know in this room we can think of 100 different ways to provide innovative nutrition and shelter and other support to families without removing kids from their communities and putting them in these orphanages. Okay, so maybe they're for children with disability? Oh no. Every expert and advocate working globally is going to tell you they want those kids, every kid, rich or poor, served in a family, a safe and nurturing family, through community-based programming. So what are we doing when we write these checks? Well, the thing is, I don't think we really know, but we dig deep. Lumos just finished a study in Haiti that showed that we're contributing $104 million annually to house 32,000 children in orphanages. That breaks down to over $3,000 per child in a country where the per capita national income is $800. There's something terribly wrong with that kind of resource allocation. Shannon, it's fueling a whole global industry, isn't it?
It is, Philip. Unfortunately, that's exactly what's happened. And the entire industry of orphanages has proliferated. And oftentimes, the industry itself is very corrupt. It provides a hotbed for human trafficking. We see children regularly trafficked through orphanages, oftentimes for child labor and child prostitution. Many orphanages actually employ people called baby finders. There are people who are paid to go out to the communities and actively recruit for new babies to come into the orphanages. They promise parents that the children will have access to education, access to health care that they wouldn't have at home with their parents who don't have the resources. They promise the parents that the children will be cared for, that they will be provided with much needed nutrition and shelter. They make all kinds of promises, and they aren't always true. In fact, many of these baby finders are paid a fee, so they actually get a recruitment fee for every child that they successfully bring into the orphanage. On the other hand, there are many of us who've been involved in orphanages at some point in our lives, thinking that we were doing the right thing, really truly with the best of intentions. Unfortunately, the mere presence of orphanages creates a pull factor from the communities. By establishing these orphanages, it provides something to the parents. It provides an opportunity for parents to place their children into these centers instead of keeping them at home. And it's not because the number of orphans is growing. It's because of our really good intentions gone wrong. The number of orphanages around the world has continued to proliferate. In Ghana alone, the number of orphanages rose from 10 in 1997 to 148 in 2006. This wasn't because there was suddenly a dramatic increase in the number of orphans living in Ghana. It wasn't because there was some outbreak that left thousands of children without their parents or that the poverty rate suddenly skyrocketed. Indeed, we see these kinds of figures happening all over the world in many, many countries. The majority of the orphanages that are being set up are foreign-owned. They're owned and operated by foreign actors, oftentimes those with the best of intentions, truly wanting to do something good for children and not understanding the irrevocable harm that they're causing. One of the saddest parts of the industry is something called volunteerism. It's the nexus of when people want to go overseas and they want to have a tourist experience, but they also want to feel good about that experience, right? So they want to volunteer. Many of our youth do this. It's not necessarily a bad thing, except that many of the volunteers, the top tourist destination for these volunteers are orphanages. The orphanages themselves receive a fee from each of the volunteers. So the volunteers come in and they provide some sort of service to the children. Because the volunteers are coming and there's a constant demand from the volunteers to go, the orphanages themselves are struggling to fill the supply. So they go out and they proactively recruit more children to come and fill the walls of the orphanage. The volunteers themselves go overseas, and even with the best of intentions, they plan to play with the children or teach the children English or hold the children and rock them. Unfortunately, it's creating more harm again. Now the children have not only been taken away from their families, taken away from their communities, and put behind these walls of the orphanage. Now they're experiencing the much-needed attention and love from these volunteers that they've been craving. But the volunteer only stays for a week, maybe two, and the volunteer leaves. And the children are subjected to an overwhelming sense of abandonment over and over and over again. It's a bleak picture. But amidst all this bleakness, we have good news. We do have a solution. And our solution, we know, has three major parts. One is really addressing this at the country level, the countries where we're working. The second is addressing this with the children and the families themselves. And the third is taking it global. Philip is an expert at setting up the national level systems.
Yes, Shannon, success is possible, and Rwanda is a great case. If you had been to Rwanda in 1994, you would have been hard-pressed to find a single orphanage. Rwandan families and communities took care of their own. But in 1994, the genocide occurred, and those communities were devastated. Dozens of orphanages sprung up across the country, housing thousands of children. Those children stayed until they became adults and exited, but do you think that the orphanages closed at that point? Of course not. They continued to take children in. The Rwandan Children's Parliament recognized this and said we need to put a stop to putting children in these orphanages and causing them harm. And they called on the government to do something about it. And the government responded. It started a campaign. Let's raise them in families. And then it set a target that by 2020, it would place every single child in an orphanage in a safe and nurturing family. And united with partners, technical experts, NGOs, community-based organizations, faith-based leaders, to set up the whole program to make this work so that each individual child's needs were assessed and met, and families were prepared and supported, and then the placements were monitored. To date, they have placed 4 out of 5 children in safe and nurturing homes that are monitored in Rwanda. So with the support of the 100&Change grant, we're going to blow this out and make it global. We have identified 7 countries that couldn't be more different from one another. Their population sizes, all different regions of the world, their cultures, faith traditions, languages, the drivers of institutionalization, whether they be disability or refugee or health or poverty. They're all vastly different. But they have one thing in common: political will. We know from our work in each of these countries that they are ripe for change. In fact, they're demanding it at the political level, but they need help. Each of these countries has sent a strong letter of support for the Changing the Way We Care program. They're ready to participate. Now, we're going to do 3 things in each of these countries at the national level. First, we're going to translate that political will into a movement of government and its partners built around advocacy that changes minds and that convinces people on the ground and in their communities of the importance of families and keeping those families strong. The second thing we're going to do is translate that movement into public policy to make sure that public and private actors are laser focused on deinstitutionalizing their systems. And the third thing we're going to do is to translate that public policy into a system. The programs and the services and the trained professionals that are needed to safely assess these children and to safely place them and to continue to support and monitor those families. Now, in philanthropy lexicon, this is something like a design-build process. It's crafted for each and every country and its circumstances. But it's not a project. As the Indonesian government said in its letter of support, we're looking for an entire change of paradigm. And it's this change in paradigm that's going to affect the lives of children on the ground. Isn't it, Shannon?
The basis of what we want to do is support families. We want to strengthen families. We want to reunite children who are currently in orphanages to go back home, to be with their families, to be in safe and protective environments. But we also want to prevent any new children from entering into orphanages and ever facing these devastating consequences. So how do we do it? We work with the national governments, like Philip said, and we set up systems that are able to provide those services to the children and the families themselves. We really focus on something called case management. We provide intensive support to the families themselves. We monitor the children. We make sure that the children's placement is in their best interests. We have people who go out, they spend time with the families, they get to know the children, and they monitor them over time to make sure they continue to be safe and protected. We also provide support for the communities themselves. We know that many of the communities need support to make sure that whatever they have at the community level is inclusive for all children. So we work with the communities to actually make sure that the education systems themselves are inclusive, that teachers are trained in how to respond to children's needs and how to be responsive to all the needs of the children within their community. We work with health workers also to train them on how to respond to the children from their communities. We also work with the communities to address stigma and discrimination, like George mentioned earlier in Sudan, making sure that any of those underlying issues that are leading to an increase in institutionalization of children is addressed so that we can prevent future placements. We also work intensively with the families themselves. So we provide ongoing support to the families to ensure that they have parenting support, they have training. When a family is welcoming a child back home from an orphanage, we work with them to make sure that they know how to respond to the needs of their children within the household, how to respond to the trauma, how to respond to the reintegration. We link parents up together so that they have support amongst one another. We also provide basic economic strengthening activities and support. So whether that is linking families up with cash transfer programs that the government's supporting, whether that is providing access to smaller scale savings groups, or providing literacy training for the family so that they can better use their resources. We are there walking alongside the families to make sure that they have the support that they need. We're doing this right now, community by community, but it's time to take it global.
Everything that we develop in each of the countries, as we transform systems and build them in each of the 7 countries, we will use the learning to spread across 7 regions. For example, in Moldova, I know that that slide doesn't quite work with what I'm just going to say, but briefly, in Moldova, we've helped the government over 10 years to reduce the number of children in institutions by nearly 90%. And that learning is currently being used to help the Russian government and the Ukrainian government develop their plans for change. They have asked to learn from what happened in Moldova, and that is developing change programs for more than 500,000 children currently languishing in the sorts of orphanages that Philip showed you earlier. Our program in Haiti together is going to work to demonstrate how it is possible in a country with quite weak governance and with extreme poverty, and that is continuously lashed by political change and also by terrible, devastating environmental and weather incidents such as hurricanes and earthquakes. We are going to show how it's possible in a country like that to build a stable system to protect children. And most importantly, we are going to help to shift the money. That 100 million currently going into Haiti to fund 30,000 children in orphanages, but which is actually most of that money going into the pockets of traffickers, will be diverted and will be used to help 340,000 children to live in families, be in schools, and have the possibility to develop to their full potential. Each of the countries' programs will teach the other countries around it and will help us to build regional movements that we use to put pressure on the global decision makers so that changing the way we care becomes a priority, a top priority for sustainable development for the planet. At the same time, a global communications program will be educating people across the world, societies across the world, on the harm caused by orphanages, because so few people know how harmful they are, but also showing how the real change for children lies within families and in communities themselves. And we will work with donors across the world, from the volunteer giving $500 to the European Union giving $5 billion a year in global aid. We will ensure that money currently spent in orphanages is shifted across to the community-based services, health, education, and social protection that the most vulnerable children and families need. And all of this will be led and informed by children themselves. As one young girl said to me recently, who was in an institution but then had the luck to be moved to a foster family, she said, "We need to stop investing in buildings and start investing in families. Because when you invest in families, it's like investing in the blacksmith who forges the suit of armor that children need, which is love." Governments, communities, donors, professionals, families, and especially children themselves. Together, we will create an unstoppable global movement for change.
Stephen and Victoria are not alone. 8 million Stephens and Victorias are out there. I'm happy to let you know that today, Stephen is a thriving adult. Thanks to a social worker who took a special interest in him and his own resilience, he was able to go on to university. He graduated from university in the Netherlands, realized that he didn't know where home was and decided to make it his life's work to speak on behalf of other children like himself, to ensure that all children had access to a family. He went back to Kenya. He created the Kenya Care Leavers Society, a group of adults who have left care after participating in orphanage care as a child. He's also a global advocate for children's issues. Victoria was able to return back home when her school and her community became inclusive. She's 20 years old today. She graduated from high school 2 years ago, and now she volunteers with her local school. She's also an advocate with the Lumos Youth Advisory Board, and she also joined us along with a larger group of youth advocates from Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, and Moldova in May to inform our project and provide advice and recommendations to changing the way we care. I'm extremely honored to let you know that Stephen and Victoria are both here with us today. I hope you'll take advantage of our breakout session this afternoon where they will be our feature and be happy to speak to you. They're very much looking forward to sharing their stories. There are 8 million Stephens and Victorias out there, 8 million children waiting to become thriving adults. That's the ripple effect of actually investing in families, not casting them aside, of valuing our children, not forgetting about them, of funding the solution and not the problem. We know the problem, and we have the solution. And together, we have the experience, the expertise, and the passion to change the way the world cares for children. And it all starts now.
The change begins with you.
You will change the lives of millions of children forever.
Join us in changing the way we care.
Thank you.
All right, thank you to Changing the Way We Care. So how exactly do you solve a problem? One where the need is so obvious, so urgent, but it seems intractable. As we've seen, there's no one answer, but there are answers, and that there are actually solutions out there that you can invest in. Solutions that we can scale, solutions that we can make possible. After those 4 presentations, I'm a little more inspired, and I'm a little more hopeful as a jaded journalist. As an enemy of the people. And I'm grateful, grateful for the hard work and dedication of all who've participated in the 100&Change competition. And that's especially true of the 4 presentations. They have been working on these presentations since they became finalists. These 4 bold solutions that inspired us all. They're not finished quite yet. After lunch, we break into smaller groups. As a reminder, your schedule is on the personalized program that you received at registration. There will be breakout sessions with each of our finalists, giving you the opportunity to explore a little more, to learn from them on a more personal level. We will close the day with a reception where we can all connect, share our thoughts, and celebrate the optimism and inspiration of this day. Then, on Wednesday, December 20th, MacArthur plans to announce the winner of its $100 million grant. But this work won't end with one grant or a single winner. There are hundreds of projects that are ready to go, ready to be funded. Today is just the beginning. So thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, lunch is now being served on the opposite side of the ballroom. Please feel free to join us.